The moment Eleanor Whitmore looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Stop dating beginners. You need a real lioness," something inside me shifted in a way I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't anger. It wasn't embarrassment either, though standing in her perfectly arranged living room, holding a chipped mug of tea I didn't even want, I probably should have felt both. Instead, it felt like someone had quietly placed a mirror in front of me, and for the first time, I was forced to really look. I had come over that afternoon to return a book. That's how it always ends, doesn't it? Not with shouting, not with drama, but with small, polite exchanges. "Here's your book. Take care. All the best." And just like that, a chapter closes without ever truly being understood. Her daughter, Olivia, wasn't home. Of course she wasn't. We had broken up 2 days earlier, and I had no intention of seeing her again so soon. I thought I'd leave the book with her mother and be done with it. But Eleanor Whitmore had other plans. She didn't take the book from me right away. Instead, she gestured for me to sit, poured tea like we were old friends, and studied me with a calm, thoughtful expression that made me feel both seen and exposed. "You're a kind young man, Daniel," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "That's not your problem." I remember blinking, unsure whether to feel complimented or confused. "My problem?" I asked. She nodded slightly, as if she had already weighed her words carefully. "You keep choosing people who are still learning who they are, and then you try to grow alongside them, thinking that's love." I let out a quiet breath. "Isn't it?" Her lips curved into a soft smile, but there was sadness in it. "Sometimes. But not always. Sometimes it's just two people wandering in different directions, hoping they'll end up in the same place." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew she wasn't wrong. Olivia had been wonderful in many ways. Bright, spontaneous, full of dreams that changed with the seasons. One week she wanted to travel the world as a photographer, the next she was applying for corporate internships, convinced stability was everything. I had admired her passion. I had tried to support her through every shift, every doubt, every new version of herself. But somewhere along the way, I had lost track of my own direction. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. "You don't need someone to grow up with you, Daniel. You've already done a great deal of growing." Her words felt heavier than they sounded. "You need someone who knows who she is," she continued. "Someone who doesn't need you to guide her every step. Someone who can stand beside you, not behind you, not ahead of you, but with you." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "A real lioness," she said softly. The room fell silent after that. I stared down at my hands, at the faint ink mark on my thumb from work earlier that day, and wondered when exactly I had become someone who needed advice like this. "I cared about her," I said quietly. "I know," Eleanor replied. "And she cared about you too. But caring isn't always enough to build something lasting." There was no judgment in her voice. No criticism. Just honesty. And somehow, that made it harder to dismiss. I left her house a few minutes later, the book still sitting on her coffee table, completely forgotten. As I walked down the quiet street, her words echoed in my mind like a question I hadn't yet answered. What did I actually need? For years, I had thought love was about patience. About understanding. About being there for someone, no matter how uncertain things felt. And maybe it was. But maybe it was also about choosing someone who could meet you halfway. The next few weeks felt different. Not in any dramatic, life-altering way. I still went to work, still met friends, still followed the same routines. But there was a quiet awareness in everything I did, like I had stepped into a slightly clearer version of my own life. I noticed things I hadn't before. Like how often I compromised my own plans to accommodate someone else's uncertainty. How I tended to listen more than I spoke, to give more than I received, not because anyone asked me to, but because it felt natural. Kindness had always been my strength. But maybe I had mistaken it for something else. One evening, about a month after the breakup, I found myself at a small community book event in town. It wasn't my usual scene, but a colleague had insisted I come along. "You need something new in your life," he had said with a grin. "And at the very least, there'll be good coffee." He wasn't wrong about the coffee. The room was warm and softly lit, filled with quiet conversations and the occasional laugh. People browsed shelves, discussed authors, and shared recommendations like they were passing around little pieces of themselves. I stood near the back at first, observing more than participating. Until I heard a voice. "You're holding that book like you're not sure whether to trust it." I turned, slightly startled, and found a woman standing beside me, her expression curious but kind. She had a calm presence about her, grounded, steady. Not loud or attention-seeking, but quietly confident in a way that immediately drew you in. "I wasn't aware I looked that suspicious," I said, managing a small smile. She smiled back. "Not suspicious. Just thoughtful." I glanced down at the book in my hands. "I've read this author before. Not sure if I'm ready for another emotional roller coaster." "Ah," she nodded knowingly. "So you're deciding whether the journey is worth the cost." "That's one way to put it." She extended her hand. "I'm Harriet." "Daniel." We shook hands, and for a moment, something felt different. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just steady. "What do you usually read, Daniel?" she asked. And just like that, the conversation began. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't filled with nervous energy or awkward pauses. It flowed naturally, like two people simply sharing space and thoughts without trying too hard to impress each other. We talked about books, then about work, then about life in general. Harriet was a teacher. She loved what she did, but she didn't romanticize it. She spoke honestly about the challenges, the small victories, the importance of showing up consistently, even on days when it felt difficult. "I think people underestimate the power of consistency," she said at one point. "It's not about grand gestures. It's about being reliable. For others, and for yourself." Her words stayed with me. Because they felt familiar. Not in the sense that I had heard them before, but in the sense that I had been trying to live them, without fully realizing it. "Can I ask you something?" she said later, tilting her head slightly. "Of course. Why did you come here tonight?" It was a simple question. But it caught me off guard. "I suppose I needed something new," I admitted. She nodded, as if she understood more than I had said. "Sometimes," she said softly, "new doesn't mean different places. It means seeing the same world with clearer eyes." We ended up sitting at a small table near the window, talking long after most people had left. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people connecting in a way that felt balanced. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the conversation. I didn't feel like I had to guide it, shape it, or keep it alive. It simply existed. And so did we. As the evening came to an end, Harriet gathered her things and looked at me with a small, thoughtful smile. "I'm glad you came tonight," she said. "Me too." There was a brief pause, the kind that usually fills with uncertainty. But this time, it didn't. "Would you like to do this again sometime?" she asked. There was no hesitation in her voice. No second-guessing. Just clarity. And for the first time, I realized how much that mattered. "I'd like that," I replied. As I walked home that night, Eleanor's words came back to me. A real lioness. I finally understood what she meant. It wasn't about strength in the obvious sense. Not about dominance or control. It was about presence. About knowing who you are, and standing firmly in that truth, without needing someone else to define it for you. Harriet didn't need me to complete her. She wasn't searching for direction or waiting for someone to guide her path. She was already walking it. And she was inviting me to walk alongside her. Weeks turned into months. Our connection grew, not through grand declarations or dramatic moments, but through consistency. Through shared conversations, quiet support, and a mutual understanding that felt both rare and deeply comforting. We challenged each other, but never in a way that felt overwhelming. We supported each other, but never in a way that felt one-sided. It was balanced. And for the first time, I realized that love didn't have to feel like uncertainty. It didn't have to be something you constantly questioned or tried to fix. Sometimes, it could simply be right. One afternoon, nearly a year after that first meeting, Harriet and I found ourselves walking through the same street where Eleanor Whitmore lived. I hadn't thought about her in a while, but as we passed by the familiar house, I slowed down slightly. "Everything all right?" Harriet asked. I nodded, a small smile forming. "Just remembering something someone once told me." "Something good, I hope." I glanced at her, at the quiet strength in her presence, at the certainty in her eyes. The best advice I didn't know I needed. She smiled, and we continued walking. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. Kindness is not weakness. Patience is not settling. And love, real love, is not about finding someone to fix or guide. It's about finding someone who stands beside you, steady and sure, and chooses, every single day, to walk forward together. A true partner. A true equal. A true lioness. And when you find that, everything changes.